We often talk about likelihoods and probabilities when rolling dice, but just how do they apply to Dungeons and Dragons? How often do we fall into the gambler's fallacy trap, and when are we using these statistics properly? Let's talk about that today. So, I want to talk about gambler's fallacy before anything else because it's important to understand it. It should lay the groundwork for everything else we talk about. The gambler's fallacy is when we misunderstand how statistics works based on previous data. If you flip a coin, it's 50-50. It lands on heads. Flip again. Lands on heads. Flip again. Lands on heads. The gambler's fallacy happens when someone would say, well, it's landed on heads 3 times in a row. It's got to be tails this time. There's no way it lands on heads a 4th time in a row. No matter what the previous results are, you still have a 50-50 chance to land on either side. We call it gambler's fallacy because it applies very much to luck-based gambling. If I just keep playing slots, I'm bound to win. No, you're not. No matter how many times you play the slots game, you have the exact same chance to win or lose every time. How does this apply to the D20 and even the other D&D dice? Well, it's similar. What are the odds that you roll a 1? 1 out of 20. What are the odds that you roll a 20? 1 out of 20. Pick any number on the dice. You have the exact same chance to roll any given number. We're assuming that the dice are in good condition and are made properly. So given that, we can say that any combination of numbers in sequence is equally as likely. So for example, rolling 3 natural 1s in a row is just as likely as, say, a 2, 5, and then a 16. It sounds different because our brains attribute a pattern to the first set and not to the second, but it's essentially the same if we're talking about rolling in sequence. Now, here's where the statistics can start to change. If we ask, what are the odds of rolling higher than a 1? Then you can say that your odds are pretty good, 19 out of 20. However, we can say the same of rolling lower than a 20. What are the odds of rolling higher than a 10? 10 out of 20. Lower than a 10? 9 out of 20. 10 or higher? 11 out of 20. This can be directly applied to death saving throws. The developers actually made it slightly in your favor by making it 11 out of 20. So, knowing about Gambler's Fallacy, is there any point then to advantage and disadvantage in 5th edition? The answer is a resounding yes. Let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that you are rolling sequentially and not simultaneously. You roll your first dice with advantage and roll a natural 1. Because you have advantage, you have a free reroll. Again, we ask, what are the odds of rolling higher than a 1? Suddenly, advantage has given you a 19 out of 20 chance to improve your roll. Now, say you roll a 16 on the dice with advantage. You have locked in 16, but you have a free reroll to see if you get any higher. So what are the chances of getting higher than 16? 4 out of 20, or 20%. So, although your chances of rolling higher are low, unlike your gambling game like slots, no matter what you roll second, you can never get lower than your first roll with advantage, since it takes the higher of the 2 rolls. If advantage is a free reroll, then disadvantage is a forced reroll. You roll your first dice and get a natural 20. Now, you must roll that second die, and your chances of rolling lower are 19 out of 20. On the next sequence of disadvantage, you roll a 4. Now, if that's already enough to miss, then you've already missed. But if your DM treats natural ones differently, then you still need to roll again, just in case. I personally don't do severity in combat for natural ones, but I do for outside of combat, but to each their own. Your chances of rolling higher than a 4 are 16 out of 20, but you can never roll higher than a 4, because disadvantage takes the lower score. So yes, advantage and disadvantage are very good tools in this game. However, I do need to point something out. With advantage or disadvantage, your chance of getting a 1 or a 20 is still the same no matter how many times you roll. Even with advantage, your chance of getting a natural 20 is still 1 out of 20, or 5%. Rolling twice gives you 2 chances to get 20, with a total of 40 potential numbers to land on, which still reduces to 1 out of 20, or 5%. Remember, you're just trying to land on 20 once with advantage. You give yourselves more opportunity to roll a 20 with advantage, but that doesn't increase your chances to hit it. It's the same mentality as the gambler trying to hit 7s on the slots. You can increase your opportunity to win by throwing more money at the game, but that doesn't increase your chances of winning the jackpot. Technically, you give yourself more opportunities to roll a 20 with disadvantage, and more opportunities to roll a 1 with advantage. The difference is the difference between the forced and free reroll, as I mentioned before. If you roll a 20 on your first roll with advantage, you don't even need to make the second roll. With disadvantage, you must reroll, and your chances of rolling lower are 19 out of 20. But still, 1 out of 20 chances to roll a 1, or still a 1 out of 20 chance to roll another 20. The same is true in reverse if your first roll is a natural 1. You don't need a second roll with disadvantage, but advantage gives you the 19 out of 20 chance to improve your score. Advantage gives you a better chance to hold on to that critical success than disadvantage, and disadvantage gives you a better chance to hold on to that critical failure. In both cases, it's 100% versus 5%. Big difference. But again, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves and say that advantage gives you a better chance to roll a natural 20. It doesn't. It just allows you to hold on to that crit no matter what, if that first roll is a natural 20. Just understand the difference. So, what happens if you roll simultaneously rather than sequentially? Well, it's not much different. It basically comes down to which dice would you have rolled if it was a straight roll, or which dice would you have rolled first. That's it. If you just picked up 2 dice without thinking, then it really doesn't matter. Whatever dice you would have picked up first. It's not all that important if you really don't care about the statistics in this case, then just roll simultaneously. But if you really want to know, what your chances are and understand the statistics, it's probably better to roll sequentially. But I usually roll simultaneously because even though I'm talking about this shit, I don't really care all that much. So then we add modifiers into the equation, and then things start to get a bit more complicated, but not by much. Ability score improvements and proficiency bonuses are the game's main ways of giving you better odds the more you progress in level. There is probably a trend of higher average armor class among monsters of higher challenge rating. I'm honestly not sure. I haven't studied this in depth, but I'd imagine there is. But the difference is made up by your level. AC in the monster manual doesn't go above 25, which is very doable for high level characters. At 17th level with a 20 stat, that's plus 11, and that's not including any bonuses you might have elsewhere. For example, if you're an archer that takes an archery fighting style, that's now plus 13. And at 17th level, you gotta have a magic weapon, right? Chances are you probably have at least a plus 1 enchantment, if not plus 2 or even a plus 3. So that's a plus 14 to plus 16 in general as an archer. To hit a Tarrasque at that level, you gotta roll an 11 or higher on the lower end, or 9 on the higher end, making your odds pretty good for going against the strongest monster in the game. Goblins have a 15 AC, and your average 2-hit bonus at first level is going to be a plus 4 to plus 5. Interestingly enough, similar odds. Now, at say a plus 11 2-hit level 17 character, assuming no magic weapons whatsoever, or fighting styles or maneuvers, you only need a 4 or higher to hit the goblin. So in this case, that's a 17 out of 20 or 85% chance to hit. Of course, it should be briefly mentioned that expertise gets progressively better over time and doesn't really follow the same kind of bounded accuracy mechanics that 2-hit bonuses have. It's simply because expertise doubles your proficiency bonus, rather than adding a static addition modifier to it. When your proficiency goes up by 1, your 2-hit goes up by 1, and your expertise goes up by 2. Then we have a slightly more complex percentage game when we add multiple dice into the 2-hit bonus. For example, Bless and Bane. We'll go with Bane for this example.
Oh, you called PentSage.
Yeah, Bane, I need you to explain how this game works.
Of course. You see, fire rises.
That's your answer? Fire rises?
Yes.
Some help you were. So, if you're not aware, Bane and Bless subtract or add a d4 to your attack and saves. So in this case, you roll a d20 plus or minus a d4. If we're taking out modifiers for just a moment and looking at the dice outcome, it slightly manipulates the percentages. The highest possible dice outcome with Bane is 19. The lowest would be a minus 3, which I mean, you might as well fall on your own sword at that rate. It would be pretty funny too if this was a save with a negative modifier giving you like a negative 5 or something ridiculous. Or maybe you took Sharpshooter as a variant human at level 1 that rolled a nat 1, minus 5 for Sharpshooter, plus 4 to hit, and minus 4 for Bane, for a total of -4. In either case, the percentages are going to vary greatly depending on your DM. Do natural 20s supersede any Bane negatives? Does rolling less than a 1 still count as a 1? There are a lot of factors involved in how you calculate your percentages, so I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of it. But I thought I should mention it because it does muddy things up a bit and it's fun to talk about. So that's about it. I didn't mention the percentile dice at all, oddly enough, but you can apply the same logic to that die, so it really doesn't matter. In D&D, we use the D20 the most, and percentile is very rarely used. It's a glorified D10 anyway, so I didn't really see the purpose of going in depth with it. I hope you enjoyed this little video. This may not have been the most interesting for D&D players, as it talked a little bit more about math than Dungeons and Dragons, but hopefully you enjoyed it nonetheless. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.